the vitamin A intake, vegetables, eggs, liver, and so forth, really depends on food production. And so the vitamin A program in Nepal is a supplementation program that is ostensibly the best in the world. Despite the poverty and the insurrections and the political instability, a program got put into place by NTAG, by Dr. Ram Shrestha and the government and so forth, and colleagues in the 90s, got it up to 85% and kept it there. What that does is it reduces blindness, it reduces child mortality. We've published from Nepal that it reduces hearing loss due to otitis media. But what it does not do is persistently raise serum retinol levels in the population, nor does it improve intake, dietary intake. So this work here through the Nutrition Innovation Lab has to go forward along with all the other partners working in Nepal to get the diet improved. What we're doing with that vitamin A capsule program is to keep children alive and sighted during the 20 to 30 or 40 years that it takes to improve agriculture and the diet. So it's a process, and it's in process. How does mom intake relate to child intake? So I'm trying to remember that data right now, but I can tell you from other data in Nepal that we've studied over the years is that there's a high correlation between what one sibling eats and then what the next sibling eats coming down the pike, when they get to the age where they can eat, and with what the mother consumes. So I would expect that we'll find it, but we will get back to you on that question. And low BMI in the Terai it seems like a paradox. The Terai grows the most food. It's the most population dense as well. It has the best agriculture, it has the best soil, it has the greatest population density markets and so forth, and the women are the most wasted. It tells us that there are parts of this pathway from agriculture production to consumption to health and nutrition that we haven't figured out yet. There are different cultures in the Terai. In the plains, between the hills, as you know, and the mountains. These are different cultures, and different values are associated with how the sexes are treated across the country. And it may well be the subjugation of women and the role that they have in the home, and the food that they take, which is usually after the husband and the sons consume. There are cultural obstacles to overcome in terms of how to improve the status, the daily life of women in the Terai, perhaps more than in other parts of the country, but that's opinion at this point. I don't know if you want to add anything.
And I think that the point that really needs to be addressed is that socio-cultural piece, and I think there are some analyses, I've been asked to speak louder, there are some analyses that are pointing in that direction, but I don't think that we have looked at that. That's one element, and I do know that there is information in the data that will allow us to understand what's happening with women in the Terai versus women in the hills and the mountains.
I would probably pose this question to Professor Webb. The data are showing a strong relationship between improving local production and of small animals and fruits and vegetables with intake. So there's a strong association there. So the answer from the data would be, yes, it's important to, in this economy, in a subsistence economy, to put a great deal of focus on encouraging local small farmer production. There are many other reasons why that should happen as well. But maybe Patrick would like to elaborate
I think Patrick,
on
you
that.
need to.
I agree. And I think this is a really important question, and it links to what Dr. Scheidele was talking about as well. Given that processed foods, or value chain processed foods, are making it to the remotest parts of a country like Nepal, even in the mountains and really areas far flung, instant noodles and packaged snacks of many kinds, it really does speak to the need to focus a lot more attention on value chain work that allows for longer storage and therefore longer transportation and access of nutritionally valuable foods at a price that people can afford. And that really is a big opportunity. The market is there. Things do move. So how can we better promote nutritionally valuable processed foods to enter into that chain of trade and marketing in ways that allows access to those nutrients at different seasons, in different places, and among poorer consumers. And I think this is an area that it's crying out for much more investment and much more attention.
First, I want to say is that it's an association. It hasn't led. So it's because it's cross-sectional data. So it's what we are seeing is in the hills, it seems that production diversity is very high because the count was about 10 crops, stroke livestock species, and that's somehow associated with households and diet diversity of women in those households to be lower. So that's the first key thing. We don't have a causal relationship there. There is literature, and I know I wanted to put some things in there, but I didn't have time. There is a multi-country analysis that has been done in which they've looked at Kenya, Malawi, Ethiopia, and Indonesia, and what they found was when production diversity goes very high, there's some kind of a point where it plateaus out, the relationship, and that it becomes either insignificant or it becomes negative. So it's a sort of, it's got to do with their over-diversifying, and we're not actually accounting for what they're diversifying, because you could see in Keith's presentation is that if they did have those nutritious foods, they were more likely to consume it. So I think the relationship is very complex. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, and it is further, I'm looking at it from an income and market perspective and overall production diversity, cash crops versus food crops. And it's further complicated by what food crops are being grown and how that translates to better consumption.
You bring up three great examples of indeed the complexity of the pathways that can actually cause an intervention to stumble when it comes to whether it actually improves on a sustained basis the quality of the diet of the target population that you're seeking to do something with, either economically or growing a cash crop that has a market or not, because there's choice. There's choice and there's money involved, and neither of those are going to necessarily respond the way that we think they should in terms of improving quality of diet. I don't think we should back away from complexity. We just need to understand it's there, and that's why it takes so much work to figure out, how this causal web works. And there's a lot of work going on nowadays in terms of bringing system science into understanding nutrition problems from obesity to agriculture. And that's probably where we have to go, because we're talking about a system where something gets perturbed and another thing happens, but we don't always have all the data to predict what will happen. Certainly education has to be a continuous activity, and the choice of foods has to be thoughtful. And if it's a new food, new nutritious food that hasn't been eaten in the area, there has to be a lot of homework done to prepare the community for those foods. A good example is the biofortification effort at Harvest Plus and the introduction of orange maize that has had enormous amounts of advocacy and work done to warm the population up in Zambia and elsewhere to eating a fluorescent flour as opposed to the white flour, and they're doing it. So you can do it, but it takes lots of homework across all these pieces.
I think the results around the malaria and anemia and animal source food in reference to cattle is extraordinarily important, because if you only think of animal source foods and leading to a particular nutritional benefit and you don't look at this other thing that's happening around that, then in fact you're missing the boat in many ways. And from a policy point of view, Uganda has been called the most malarious country in the world. So we're talking about the leading cause of death in children, and we're talking about something which is a more important cause of anemia than just about anything else, malaria. At the same time, we're pushing cattle, which increases malaria rates unless we're being careful about how we control malaria. So from the policy perspective, thank you for asking me the question, I think one is kind of foolish not to pay attention to this.
I could just add on, please.
Sure, please.
If I were an advisor to your side, I think the point would be that you could have livestock improve nutrition, but then these benefits could be derailed by the effects that cattle would bring about. So, for instance, increased malaria. So, at the end of the day, you might not have that optimum sort of like benefit of the intervention.
Well, I think that you need to do the kind of careful work where you look at what the costs and the benefits are, and you actually look at the externalities, and you don't say to yourself, oh, I don't know how to deal with this problem over here, I'll just ignore it. But rather what you do is you bring in the expertise to be able to do that, so that you can look at climate change, you can look at malaria, you can look at all of those things.
Great question. I think this offers us an opportunity, this community writ large, to focus on diet quality as a key aspect of health and nutrition and the drivers from agriculture and food systems. And I think it's really important to educate and to get people to move beyond generalizations. Oh, we know that animal source food consumption reduces stunting, therefore we've got to promote that everywhere with everyone. Clearly, that's not the case. So we need to figure out a more nuanced message, and it's really one about appropriate dietary choices and diet quality in the context of access to health systems and prevention and everything else. But I think this is an opportunity, and that's why I showed that slide, is that key foods are not inherently good or bad. Key food groups are not inherently good or bad. It depends. It depends. And so we have to be more nuanced about that.
Good answer. And just to quote our president, President Obama, who at the UN was talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and a big push as part of that is sustainable diets. And Patrick and I have been working with this, and I think we have to realize what is acceptable to the consumer. And for those who talk about the balance between ecological carbon footprint in the diet, part of that has to factor in consumer preference, and the nutrition transition is happening. So to say promote a diet totally devoid of animal source foods, it's probably for a large part of the world's population not that palatable. Where is that balance between environmental sustainability and dietary sustainability?